All right. Well, good morning, Christos.
Good morning.
Super early for you, but you know.
Hey, the early bird catches the worm, is it?
I don't know. 7 a.m. is pretty early.
That's why I have my pot of coffee here. You know, it definitely helps with the stream and getting me ready for whatever the day has to bring to us.
I didn't get up at 7 a.m. till I had kids.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, kids get you into that kind of a mode where you have to get up whatever time they get up. There used to be a period in our life that our older one would get up at 4 a.m. in the morning and she wanted to play.
Oh, yeah.
And us being young parents, we didn't know better. So like, yeah, let's get up and play with her. So we'll take turns rather than tell her, go back to bed. It's too early.
Yeah, my daughter likes to get up about 6 or 6:15. She comes in, she's ready to go. She's ready to go for the day. She's dressed, you know. I mean, my oldest would wear his pajamas all day if he could, but my daughter, she's up and dressed. And good morning, Daddy. Good morning, Mom. I'm ready. I'm ready for the day. What are we gonna do today? We're like, oh my God.
Here's an agenda of all the things I want to do. I have a schedule.
So, well, this is the last week that I'll be in the basement. Next week I'll be back home and be able to do the stream probably with some better lighting, maybe a little better audio.
Yeah.
So,
like being back to your own equipment is always nice.
Yeah, I'm gonna try the Skype NDI today. So if there are any audio issues, if anybody hears any audio issues or anything, please let us know. But I think, unlike last week, I think we are good to go on audio today.
Awesome.
So let's get to it. So today, what are we doing today? Blazor server side app.
Yeah, remember we had a meeting with Javier last week from the program manager, and he gave us some really good insights about authentication with Blazor because we wanted to know where we are. And we got so pumped up that we said we should do a stream on this one, absolutely. So today we're going to be tackling Blazor with Azure AD and a little bit of MS Graph, if time allows it.
All right, we're going to do some Blazor server side. So
Blazor server side, yes, because there are differences there, and that's what Javier was trying to instill to us and the rest of the community, that the Blazor server side is quite different to the client side and the standalone app. So we start with the docs first because people may be keen to see how they get started as well. I mean, we'll probably have to go through the docs anyway, so I thought it would be a good idea to bring them up.
Yeah, that's probably a good idea. One other thing, check to make sure that you are using your Yeti mic, by the way.
Oh, come on. Please tell me it's not that thing again.
I mean, it sounds fine. It's just a little
chubby.
Just like you're hanging out in a Pringles can, and that's fine. You know. So yeah, I think one of the big things.
Yeah.
One of the
yeah.
Okay. Oh, much better.
Sounds to be. The universal set of audio and video. Thank you. Still learning.
So one of the big things we learned from Javier was that there's an entire set of Blazor docs around authentication that are not part of our Azure AD tree.
Yeah. Well, I mean, not the wrong location. They are in the right location, but we need to also identity docs. So we're working on that. Okay. Just search for Blazor with Azure AD. That should be the top one. Wow, all right. Internet is slow.
Well, it's not awful here, but it's also not the best.
You're going back to your fiber internet, so I envy you.
Yeah, it'll be nice to be back home. So okay, so So Blazor has their own. They've got a whole stack of really good documentation that's in their Blazor tree, as opposed to the Azure AD tree, which I think is why this wasn't immediately obvious when we were looking around about it yesterday.
Yep.
So or last week. So where was that? There was an Azure AD specific one. I thought Azure AD Blazor docs. Here we go.
Did you resize me? Did you resize my window? You want to be smaller than you? Is that it?
No, I didn't.
Is OBS messing up with our stream?
I'm sure. We'll figure this out one day.
Sure. Yes, if you like, there's a standalone with Azure AD, but we are further up because we are. If you scroll up on the docs, then you should be able to see it.
I'll check your video. See why you're sort of an odd crop right now. Seems something's not right about it. Obviously, because you're a lot smaller than you were before. There we go. Should be a little better. Okay. So Javier gave us a lot of really good info last week on what we should expect, right? And I think on the server side, our expectation is that this should largely kind of work the same way, right? That
Yep.
there really shouldn't be a dramatic difference between what you would do in a typical ASP.NET Core like an MVC app and in Blazor. Although the biggest difference with Blazor, of course, is that it's effectively a WebSocket that gets opened, and that's where all the view updates come from. So if you think of what a typical OpenID Connect or OAuth 2 interactive user sign-in looks like, and you get redirected over to some place and then you come back, and that's going to be a little bit different with Blazor, and especially with things like accessing the claims collection in an ongoing manner, or making sure that you capture the info off of the redirect correctly and then reusing it later. So if you're using Blazor server side, for the most part it's going to be pretty similar, but there are going to be a few changes that we have to make, or a few maybe sort of rules of engagement, and then once we're past those, largely it should sort of stay the same. So it looks like we have, we've got a regular client app of a hosted solution, and then they've created this factory for, it looks like, for grabbing the user identity, and it adds some groups and some roles to that user identity and then sends it back. And
You should be. Is that the right one? Is that the right one that we're looking at? Azure AD groups and roles.
Yeah, this is groups and roles. We want to look more. I was wondering why we were talking about groups and roles already. We want to look at we want to look at one of these. So that's WASM hosted. We don't really want WASM. We want Blazor Server. Oh, where are they?
Yep. There you go.
Well, but so we have docs for WebAssembly, but I don't see them for Blazor Server.
What about the standalone with Azure AD? What is that one? So this is the WebAssembly client side.
Yep. So this is WASM client side.
And interesting. So we are missing, because we saw Javier gave us a demo, right, on the server-side stuff.
He did.
And he showed us the code, because we're asking about the Identity.Web, and my goal for today would have been to actually try and test it and see what happens.
Yeah, and I think we were going to look at moving it maybe even to Microsoft.Identity.Web if we could.
Yeah, because I think the expectation was that it should work out of the box without really having to do anything.
Well, our other option is to quit trying to find what we had and just go back to what he sent us.
That's a very good point.
So let's go back and see Let's go back and see what we've got.
And I think we identified a gap there. We definitely need to add some docs for service.
Yep.
I'm surprised we don't have them.
The internet does seem kind of slow today, but that's okay.
Mm-hmm.
Probably because I'm trying to do all this off of a laptop. So this is his sample, which we'll make sure we get this off into the chat. And one of the things that he told us specifically was that he has so many questions about this that he said, you know what, I'll just write a good sample and write some docs, and that way we'll have sort of a standard mechanism for looking at it. So the biggest thing that he told us was that in this host CSHTML, this is where we go and actually get the tokens. So these are almost sort of happen kind of outside the app in a way, and then they get pushed in as part of the initial state, right? So these are coming in from the outside and then sort of being pushed into state, and then they're going to sit there in state for the duration, right? Which means that on subsequent activities or actions within the app, you're just going to go back and look at the state again. So why don't we just start? Let's just start by cloning his repo. Or we go back over here to Visual Studio. I don't know if we have any. Do we have any good templates yet in Visual Studio for?
Remember, you have to use the CLI.
Oh, do we have to use that for this too?
Yeah. Because I don't think that the. Oh, wait a minute. No. If you actually, I think right now we have server-side support in Visual Studio. We do not have client-side support. So let's try the server-side support, because you should be able to create the app registration from Visual Studio and get the bare bones code for it. So let's see how that goes.
Yeah, let's see how that goes. So let's create a new. We'll create a new Blazor app here.
Correct. You should be presented with the option to add authentication. There you go.
All right. So this is the typical sort of Azure AD. This is the normal Azure AD tooling that you'd expect if you were doing MVC or anything else, right? So let me put in my sample tenant or my test tenant here.
Mm-hmm.
Visual Studio will load for 300 hours, and then eventually we'll get where we need to go.
So this one is going into Azure AD, creating the app registration, which we'll need to go and configure later on with appropriate tokens.
Yep.
Because we want to call them as graph.
Yep. So I use.
You know what? Do you want to bring up a nice OneNote so we can put a summary of what we're building today? So if people ask, we can put it on the screen.
Sure.
And once that completes, obviously.
Yep. So if you don't have MFA, you should. Okay.
You should have MFA. If you are using Azure AD, you get it for free. All you have to do is just go and flick the switch on your Azure AD tenant. And you get an Azure AD tenant free as well with the M365 developer program. Let me put that link onto our chat.
Okay, so now Visual Studio has actually handled going and creating the app registration for us.
Mm-hmm.
So while we're doing this, I'll go ahead and get up a window to Azure AD. Okay. All right. So we got our project. We'll let Visual Studio sit here and or we'll let the Azure portal load, and we'll see that app registration that got created. Of course, you need an app registration for anything you're doing that's interacting with Azure AD. So if you don't have an app registration and your tooling isn't going to create one for you, you can always come in here and do it yourself, right?
Yeah, the only exception is managed identities, which are not an app registration, but they do create a service principal, so they are visible in the enterprise applications.
Right, but you wouldn't end up with one of those anyway when it comes to user login, right? Because they're not
correct.
They're not
Yes.
for user login. So let's see if we can find that app. Blazor Server side AD. So created on 7/14. Is that today?
It is today.
I don't even know what day it is. It feels like it's March 339th.
Every day is a March day these days.
So we've got our app registration. You'll notice that this was created for us by the Visual Studio tooling.
So what flow are we using for this one?
So for this one, we're just going to be using a regular redirect flow. So we're going to be using OpenID Connect. We're going to sign the user in. ID tokens are enabled for implicit. That's one of the things we see with the ASP.NET Core identity libraries for OpenID is by default we've got an implicit ID token. So we're going to get that ID token at the same time. So we also have a URL here. This is this localhost 44326 WAC signin-OIDC. And if you've done any work with ASP.NET Core Identity, you'll notice the sign-in OIDC should look familiar. And largely, this is a lot of the same code, so it really shouldn't be that different. So that's going to be our redirect URL. However, this is also using IIS Express, and I prefer to use Kestrel locally because it's just everything seems to load a bit quicker. The side effect of that is that our redirect URI is going to be different. So this localhost 44326, this is our IIS Express sort of default one. So I will add a new one for localhost 5001 signin-OIDC, and this was primarily for our Kestrel endpoint, and this is for our IIS Express endpoint. So you can use whichever one you want, but just know that the default tooling is going to do web app redirect URIs as if you are using IIS Express. So we'll get that saved. The other thing we need to check is what permissions this app has, and I don't think it's going to have a whole lot except for user.read.
Yeah, the default ones.
Yep.
What do we want to add to our app? Let's make it a bit funky. So we get some emails there, so we get some calendar information. What do you think?
Well, let's see. This is connected to my test tenant, so I'm trying to think if I have emails in my inbox that are not offensive. Well,
you should keep it kosher, man. You never know.
Let's get sign-in working, and then we'll come back and add some permissions when we need to. So one thing to note, though, is that this is using the V1 endpoint, and this is using Azure Active Directory, the Azure Active Directory graph, as opposed to the Microsoft graph. And so that's just sort of somewhat of a delay in the tooling. It's just that it's a little bit behind what we do on a regular basis. And so we'll still be able to be signed in, but we're also going to be using the graph in the future. So let's add a delegated permission. And for this one, we're just going to add the same one, which is user.read. So if you've never used Azure AD or Microsoft Graph before, the graph is really how you access everything or nearly everything that we have to offer across all of our clouds. So if you want to access calendar data, for example, what happened to my browser? If you want to access calendar data, for example, for a user, type in calendar. You see we've got a bunch of permissions here for calendars. You want to access things like files in OneDrive or in SharePoint. Here we have a whole set of scopes related to files. So these are permissions that we are allowing our app to request from the user, right? So
yeah,
it's this is where we sort of, if we know what we're going to need up front, this is where we're going to set that. Of course, the big thing is we want to think more about the bare bones that we need to get our users signed in before we start going into extra permissions, because any permissions that we choose here are going to show up on a consent screen where a user has to say, yeah, I'm going to let this app read my files or sign me in. So if your app doesn't need to read files, for example, from the very beginning, then maybe it's not a big deal. Maybe we don't include this in the beginning and we ask for it a little bit later on. That's one of the big advantages to using the newer identity libraries, the MSAL and Identity.Web from us, is that instead of requiring you to know what permissions you need up front, like we used to in the past, now you can ask for new permissions as you need them. So you might think of a feature that saves some data to a SharePoint site or saves some data to a OneDrive or a OneNote file. if not all of your users are going to use that, or if it's an optional feature like a value add, don't request it up front. Request it when the user clicks the save to OneDrive or save to OneNote button. And what that means for you is your users will have a much smaller list of permissions they need to grant initially in order for this app to start working. So we don't need anything for this app.
For now.
We'll
change our mind, I'm sure.
Except for user.read. Right? So we've got user.read, it's checked. We're going to add those from the graph. So now we've got one for the Azure AD graph, which is the old V1 endpoints, and now we've got one for the Microsoft graph.
Should we delete the top one, since it almost feels like a duplication there? We're not going to be hitting the V1 endpoint.
Well, we might be hitting it to start.
Fine.
So we'll leave it for the moment just to see if we can get signed in. So let's go look at our settings. And if we look at the settings for our app, we see all this was injected by the Visual Studio tooling. So this is in app settings.json. We've got our instance, which is just Azure AD. If you're using a national cloud or a sovereign cloud like Azure AD China, or Azure China, Azure Government in the U.S., like any of the U.S. govs, or the older Germany one, which the Germany one is if you're using the Germany one, you'd know about it, and you would have already been using it for a while, because I don't think we're taking new signups in Germany, because we've got some new Azure going on out there. So if you're using US Gov, I believe this is like US login.microsoft.online.us, and for China it's like login.partner login.partner.onmschina.cn, I believe.
Should I be worried that you remember that? I mean, I can't believe that you did some work with the China channel, but there you go. It's fine.
Well, I got to
make it bigger for my old eyes, man. Okay. I can't see. I'm old. I need glasses at some point.
I had an opportunity a couple of years ago to work with a company who was U.S. based, but it was deploying apps into China, into Azure China, and it was sort of fascinating how different, but how similar it was. Like, most of the resources are the same, and how you interact with them and how you use them, and the Azure portal, of course, is the same. And for the most part, the same set of features that you'd get in the U.S. or in the commercial cloud were also available in China. Of course, sometimes things take a little bit longer to get there, new products, new features, that sort of thing. But it was really pretty easy to use. Like, use the same ARM template that we used for the U.S. deployment. Same ARM templates went out for China. It was pretty neat.
Almost like Azure Stack, in a way.
I mean, it was, in a lot of ways, it was just like Azure, commercial, Azure Global, the regular Azure that everybody else uses. But it was, there are definitely lots of regulatory things to consider. Things like, there are specific, like, control numbers that need to be on websites and things like that that are going to be on the internet in China and that sort of thing, which our partner 21V, they can help you through that process. So it's kind of but it was definitely interesting to see sort of how similar and yet different the whole thing was. Okay, so the tooling is pushed in our instance, is pushed in our domain, which is just your Azure AD tenant name. This could be your regular .onmicrosoft.com one, or if you've got a custom domain on your tenant already, you could put that in there. But this is just the the tenant name for the purposes of authenticating user. We've got our tenant ID, and we've got our new apps client ID. And of course, if we go back and look at our app, we'll see that this D2145C and D2145C. So
much, yeah. And we're single tenant for this one, or did we go multi-tenant?
Pretty sure this one is single tenant. So this is
okay.
This would be accounts in this organizational directory only. So this would be enterprise line of business app, or something that's internal only to your org.
Perfect.
And maybe we should do a day specifically on Azure AD multi-tenancy, and if you're building software that has lots of different tenants in it, like if you're a software company, or if you need to deliver software to a bunch of people, maybe we should do one on that one someday. That might be fun to do. Okay.
Putting on that to-do list. There you go.
So we've got our app settings in here. Let's go take a look at our startup code. And for the most part, it doesn't look that different from what we're used to, right? So if you're doing this in MVC and .NET Core, like in a non-Blazor environment, this is largely what we would do today, right? There's nothing too dramatically dissimilar here. I mean, I think the only thing that we're really adding is server-side Blazor.
Correct.
So nothing about this really is really too wild or too new if you're familiar with ASP.NET Core and VC. So I'm just going to run it. Let's just run it and see what we get. And let's hope
I think right now it will prompt you for authenticating straight away. So you should load the app, and I think it should prompt you straight away for authentication, if I remember correctly. But let's give it a spin.
Yeah, so we've got our controllers and views are here with an authorization policy on them, and it's just an authorization policy that requires an authenticated user. So we don't have any roles, groups. We don't really have any sort of hard authorization here. So the only thing we have is that we require a user. So let's just see if it works.
Yeah, baby steps. Remember, baby steps.
So
let's do this.
So we've created an app. We use the template. We use the wizard in Visual Studio. Let's just see. Let's just see what we get. Right. Let's see what the experience is like straight off of the template, and let's hope it opens in a browser window that. Let's hope it opens in a browser window that is tied to the correct account.
Yeah, let's see. Last time you had to disable that, remember, because it was messing with your. In fact, it was opening on a totally random new browser window with a different profile every time.
Every time. Yep.
Every time. Don't know. I think you're messing with me today. My image seems very cropped, or is it OBS just not having it?
You know, it is, and I've changed it about 4 times, and it continues to go back. So I don't know if it's and it did. It used the wrong browser window, but that's okay. I'll just switch over here. We'll go over here and do it. Localhost 5001.
Easy to find from the Kestrel window. I love Kestrel, man.
Let's zoom in over here a little bit too.
Dun, dun, dun.
So here's our app, and it knows who I am. Because I was already signed in this browser window, it worked. So that's good, right? Seems pretty straightforward. So let's sign out. And you'll notice if we look at the link that's in here, get this in Notepad here. If we take a look at the link that sign out link goes to, it's going to localhost 5001, whack Azure AD, whack account, whack sign out.
Yep.
And what's interesting about that is if we look at our tree of our, if we look at our tree of our
Solution Explorer,
you'll notice there is nothing in here, which I know this is a little small. There is nothing in here.
Zoom. You know, zoom it. Zoom it.
Get this magnifier.
Window plus, right?
Well, I can't do that in Visual Studio.
No, you can do Window plus, I think, on for the zoom to come up, if I remember correctly, or a magnifier.
Oh, well, that's good to know. So,
takes a few seconds.
See,
there you go.
Still
have it. I remember.
Oh, there we go. So if we look at our Solution Explorer, we have nothing related to Azure AD in here. There are no areas. There are no folders. There's nothing in here.
It's a DLL, right? It's in the DLL that we do that.
Right. So it comes along with the ASP.NET Identity Azure AD package, which is called it's like Microsoft.ASP.NET. Let's see where my packages. There's this one in here. This ASP.NET Core Authentication Azure AD.UI. The controller methods and the controllers and the views for handling that authentication are actually packaged in here. So you don't do anything with it, really. If you just need basic authentication, you just need to get a user signed in, you really don't have to do a whole lot at all, because once you've added the package and done the configuration, it just works, right?
Yep. Yeah, it does. It's great. So, now, if you want to have dedicated pages or change the look and feel of your login, you can also, there's a scaffolding option will allow you to go and do it. So you can issue a command that will go and scaffold your auth pages. You can select and mix and match which ones you want to create, and it will allow you to do so. But why do it when you have everything for free out of a DLO?
Right. So we didn't really have to do a whole lot. We followed the wizard, and the wizard worked, and now we have now we've got an authenticated Blazor app, right?
Yep.
So let's take a little bit of a deeper look into what this is actually doing. Let's go run this again. I think it's going to the V1 endpoint, right?
Yeah. Unfortunately, for now, all our templates are pointing to the V1, but we are fixing this, and later in the year, you should be able to, out of the box, get the V2 experience without you having to do anything else.
Okay, very cool. Okay, so we're going to let this fire back up, and then we'll reload this page here. And I'm going to sign out, and we'll step through the login and see what it looks like. Or maybe I'll just do it in a private window, so I don't have to sign in another 38,000 times. So, okay. So here's our window, and it's loading up on localhost, and I'm already signed in, so we're already here. So let's go ahead and log out. And by logging out, it's taking me over to Azure AD as well. And you'll notice it said I was signed out. And now it says, now I'm back in the app, and the app is saying, okay, now you're totally signed out. So now I'm signed out both locally in the application itself, but also back at the identity provider. So now I'm also signed out in Azure AD. So if we come back to our app, we should be forced to re-authenticate. And we are. So now we're back at Azure AD, and we're being asked to pick an account. However, we take a look at our URL that we're using to sign in with. We've got our, kind of like last week, we've got our tenant ID. We're at OAuth 2, we're at authorize. We've got our client ID. We have our redirect URI. We have our response type, which in this case, we're just getting an ID token because we're not accessing any other services yet. We've got our scope. We've got our response, and then a bunch of state data to make sure that this is a safe request. So we are not using the V2 endpoint, however, right?
No, sadly no.
Yep. So let's switch that, and then we can start requesting some. We'll start requesting some permissions to go do other things, maybe to read my profile data to start, and then maybe we can go pull a mailbox or something similar that's not.
Yeah, I can send you some clean emails if you want while you're doing it.
I mean, they're probably not super offensive. I don't know. I mean, who uses?
Let's not risk it. There should be. Do you have populated data? Because the nice thing about MS, if you're using the M365 developer program, then there's an option to populate your Azure AD with sample data, which I love because it gives you a number of accounts, it gives you some sample data, emails, and what have you, and you can use one of the 15 accounts that you create to play around. So if the account that John has is not particularly clean, then we can find another account there and play around. Or I can give him access to my tenant, so we don't have to worry about these things.
I'm being facetious. It's probably just mostly a bunch of ads. But, I mean, just to make absolutely certain, I'll move it over here first before it loads. But
yep.
No, yeah. See, it's just junk. It's Cortana,
Okay.
My Analytics. So it's nothing.
There you go.
Nothing too crazy.
No, nothing offensive. As long as it's not offensive,
Nothing offensive. So, all right. So what do we want to do first? We want to move to V2, or do we want to go and try to get some data from the graph? Like, which part of this are we more interested in doing first? Which one? Where do you think we ought to go first?
I think from my perspective, I would like to tackle the moving to V2 first, because if we get the authentication working, then we can start looking at getting the tokens for graph and adding more functionality, rather than doing everything up front and then trying to backtrack where the problems may lie, because you might be authenticating but not getting the right tokens, or you might be, I think that's my approach anyway. That's how I would do it.
All right. Well, let's do that with Identity.Web.
Oh, tan.
Because this was one of the things we wanted to test anyway, right? To see how Identity.Web would work with with
Correct.
Blazor, because of course we know it works fine with an MVC app.
Yep.
And so Identity.Web, that's our new sort of authentication experience for .NET Core, where today we've got, we're using this add authentication to get authenticated, and then we're using MSAL, which is a completely separate library for fetching tokens to go and access services. So Identity.Web aims to simplify that experience, where we say, not only do I want to sign in a user, but I also need to go and access an API or get a token for some other service. And you do it in one place, right?
Correct.
As opposed to doing it in many places. So let's check, I guess we'll check the doc to get started here.
Yeah, the one thing we should say that the Microsoft.Identity.Web is a new library, but it's a not new way of authenticating against Azure AD. It is a wrapper or an extension to the MSAL library that does both authentication and token management. So it is built on top of the existing technology that we have and abstracts a lot of the complexities that you have to do and brings both MSAL and authentication into one library. But you don't have to use you don't have to get tokens to and talk to Graph if you don't have to. You can just do the authentication bit.
Yep.
So it just simplifies things quite a lot, and the documentation is great. I think the plan for us is to make it part of the standard ASP.NET Core templates for .NET 5. So you should expect this to be integrated into your solutions going forward. By default, you get the V2 endpoints, you get better functionality to work. Does it require a backend store? So I am not myself is asking, does it require a backend store? I assume that you're asking for the token management for the new identity. There are choices. You can decide whether you want to have it in memory, whether you want to have an offloaded cache like Redis or whatever to hold your tokens. Right now, there are options. We can go through them with intelligence and see what it does, but you don't need to have a backend store. It depends on how you're planning on deploying your app. So if you are going to deploy on a server farm, if you're going to have multiple instances of your app running, and you don't have sticky sessions, and then you let your load balancer decide where the traffic should go, then at that point you should have a backend service that manages your tokens, because you want to have the tokens accessible across all your instances. I hope this answers the question. I'm not myself.
Yeah, I mean, I think you ultimately do need to have some degree of some type of storage for demo code, for sample code, for starting out when you're running on a single node. In memory is probably okay, but once you move to something that's beyond just once you move to something that's going to be in a cloud environment where you're going to have multiple nodes and your nodes could go away or come back at any time, in memory one probably wouldn't be the best experience. You probably would want to use something like a distributed cache like a Redis or a SQL or some other kind of persistent store. In fact, I believe we've got some providers or some wrappers for wrapping around the distributed cache in ASP.NET for, at least we did for MSAL. I'm not sure if we have them for Identity.Web just yet. But yeah, there will need to be something that stores the tokens. And a lot of that's because there are a couple of round trips that a user has to go through in order to get signed in and then actually receive a token. And because of that, for example, when we go to the identity provider and we sign in a user, we're going to get back an authorization code unless we're using implicit, and that authorization code is going to have to be sent back to Azure AD at the time of sign-in in order to get an access token for the graph or whatever service you're accessing. And typically, you may want to you access that access token later on in your app. And so we need to store it somewhere. And so when MSAL redeems the authorization code to get an access token, it's got to be stored somewhere so that we can access it later on.
And by default, we have in-memory tokens for Identity.Web. We added in-memory tokens. We have session token caches, and then we have a distributed token cache service that supports Redis, distributed Encache, SQL Server. So these are easy to implement out of the box without really having to do anything complicated. And this is great because in the past you had to create your own token serialization and CAS, for example, if you're using .NET with the full .NET stuff. So check the documentation I put on the link there and let us know if you have any questions.
Yeah. So when it comes to like secure cookies, typically ASP.NET will consume the identity token it gets from an Azure AD. MSAL may handle returning the authorization code and getting an access token and caching it. But the ASP.NET, when you're using the defaults, will sign a user in and issue an authentication cookie to the downstream to the user for the purposes of you can almost call it for that user's browsing session of your app. So 20 minutes, 30 minutes, they'll get an application cookie, which prevents them from having to go back to the identity system every single time they refresh the page. Of course, in Blazor, it's a little bit different because you're never really leaving the page per se, because it's all done via socket and you're getting all your renders server side. So if you wanted to store data in the browser in a cookie, for example, or in local storage, you could do that, but there'd have to be an interop there to say go and fetch the data out of local storage and then push it back up the socket so that we can access it separately. And one of the things Javier had mentioned to us is that's something he's exploring, is different ways to use browser storage, be it cookies or be it local and session storage in the browser itself, and being able to interact with that from within Blazor. So I hope that answers the question.
Sweet.
Okay, I'm going to try one thing here before we move on. I'll try to... I don't know what is... so we switched to Skype NDI, so that's probably one... that's probably one part of the issue I'm having with your video. I don't know why it has... it seems to have centered directly on your head and nothing else.
I have a big head, that's why.
And
tries to fit into the screen and it struggles.
It's quite strange. So I don't entirely know why it's doing that, but I suppose one day we can. I suppose one day we'll figure it out, right? So.
Well, we're going back to the full OBS thing later in the week or next week, so we'll have a lot more access and flexibility on how we set it up. Right. Back to the code.
Right. Back to the code. Okay.
Ignore my big head.
We'll get it fixed one way or the other. I'm not entirely sure how yet, but we'll make it work one way or the other. I think now it should be a little, at least more reasonably sized. So.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I'm away from home. I'm traveling. We've been on vacation, and I decided, since I didn't have anything installed on my laptop for streaming, I thought, well, let me try Streamlabs OBS, because that's like, it's always OBS or Streamlabs. That seems to be the big debate. And so I tried Streamlabs this time. I've used OBS at home, but I don't think either of us are really super ultra pros when it comes to this yet, which you can tell by our awesome graphics of our...
oh, look at that. It went back to being wide now. Thank you. Now I'm wider than you. Look at that.
Yeah, remember it was cropped, and I guess... Oh, you know, I wonder if it's because I switched monitors and the crop resolution is different now. But anyways, I switched to Streamlabs just for the purposes of traveling, and I'm not entirely sure I'm fully in love with it yet. I mean, it seems to work okay, but it also seems to use a lot more resources. So anyway, okay, so let's get back to the code. So the wiki here, this is part of the Identity.Web wiki, is pretty... The instructions look pretty straightforward. So we're going to find our add Azure AD block in our code, which of course we have right here, and we're going to replace it with one call to add Microsoft Web Authentication with our configuration in it. So let's see how that works. And of course, we have to add the NuGet package for Identity.Web. So probably need to do that.
Yep.
So let's manage our packages here. Although I think even the Visual Studio thing will do it now, right? You just hover over it and say, hey, go get this for me. Maybe not. That's okay. We'll go get it. So it's Microsoft.Identity.Web. Why does this view take you to installed first? Does anyone ever need to go and search for theirs in the beginning like that? Okay, Microsoft.Identity.Web.
I mean, I would rather go to the updates so I can see which ones I need to update, or the search. It shouldn't default to the installed ones.
Yeah.
Like I already know what I installed. Thank you.
Okay, I guess it's searching. Okay.
Oh, look, you already have an update there. A tiny update.
Okay, so here we go. So this is pre-release right now. So let's go and we'll grab the pre-release one. This is 0.20 preview.
No, it should be 5. 0.5.
0.20 is what's in here. What's available, so.
Huh.
Yep.
I thought it was 0.5 because I checked the docs and it was like, we're updating to 0.5. Interesting.
Maybe it's just not out yet, or maybe it's not lit up for NetCore App 3.1 yet.
It could be. Very good point. Let me check the docs. Now you got me all curious.
Okay, cool. So we've got it added. We've got our NuGet package added. And now, all we should need is a using Microsoft.Identity.Web. Okay. And now we have it. Okay, now, let's go back and look at the wiki. The wiki tells us this is all that we need for authentication. So, in theory, let's give it a run, and let's give it a run and see if it runs, right? With our new configuration. Yep. Now, one of the things we should notice immediately is that we now should have V2 endpoint.
Yep.
And of course we should still be signed in. So there shouldn't be any difference here in our experience, really. As far as the user experience goes, we should just be signed in with Azure AD. So let's see if it really is this easy to add Identity.Web here.
Waiting in anticipation.
We need some like build music.
I told you. Oh, just build music? No, it should be background music anyway. We will fix that for the next stream.
See, the problem is, like, I really like dance music, especially when I'm writing code. You don't like dance music at all.
You know what? I am. Let's do a mix. We can do a variety, and then we can let people decide what they like more.
Tomato, tomato.
So we're going for dance music at 7 a.m. in the morning while we're doing while we're streaming on Blazor and Azure AD.
I mean, does it? Okay.
Ooh, somebody asked something very interesting. Anthony T. Hi all. What are your thoughts on being able to write B2c custom policies in C#? It seems I will lower the barrier of entry.
B2c custom policies. I'll tell you, the one
puts
thing...
puts a smile on JP's face. Look at that.
So the one thing, I think probably the one thing that's even weirder than dance music at 7 a.m. is talking about
B2c custom policies.
B2c custom policies at 7 a.m. It's way too early for all that, but no. So yes, I agree absolutely that it'd be great to write B2C policies in C#. Because of course, anyone who's not familiar with B2C policies, it's lots of XML. And really what you're writing when you're writing that XML is you're ultimately kind of writing XML that will be deserialized into a bunch of types that are going to ultimately be executed by IEF. I have not heard of any plans to alter that authoring experience, however.
But we can take it back to our engineering team and say that this is something that the community would like. I don't know if there's any open issues on user voice. Maybe if you want to go and create one, then we can bump it up the queue and bring it to the team's attention. This is why we're doing this one, right?
Yep, and I think there are with custom policy and B2C and B2B and external identities and a lot of the news that came out back at Build, I think there are going to be a lot of sort of changes in that space where you're going to see more you'll see more advanced scenarios being enabled in the portal. So instead of having to go write custom policy, you'll be able to do more things directly in the portal. And I think that will help, especially for the cases where you need to do, one thing in a custom policy. So now you have to go re-implement everything you're doing in B2C in custom policy because you have to, once you toggle over, you're sort of in B2C custom policy land. So the authoring experience, I think it is sort of painful, and it definitely has room for improvement. So we will make sure that we take back your feedback as well to say, what's the roadmap look like for improving that experience, and has anyone thought about it, or is there anything in flight that's going to make that experience better? I did have somebody ask the other day if they could write B2C custom policy in YAML. And I was like, oh, wait, you're breaking up. I can't hear you anymore. I got to go. 'Cause,
well, there are people that love YAML, so let's not be too picky. But,
at least XML has a schema.
XML has a schema, and I think if you can do it in code in a declarative way, like a builder pattern for, say, building policies, it becomes a lot easier to understand what you're doing, and it will be a lot more concise. However, as I said, the team is always looking to feedback, and if you have recommendations, then make sure that you put them on user voice and ping us so we can work with the team to see whether we can bump them up. The more people that vote on these things, the more they move up the priority ladder. What we are doing is taking community input and making sure that the roadmap reflects that.
Yep. Cool. So yeah, and I think B2C, and someone mentioned in the chat too, the B2C toolkit for
just the code.
The B2C toolkit for VS Code is quite helpful. In fact, I'll very quickly, we'll take a detour. I'll pull it up here. You take a look at it. One of the things that it gives you, open up a different folder here. Don't know if it's in here. Oh, there it is. So the B2C extension for VS Code, it gives you a little bit of easier sort of navigability among the policies. So it tries to parse the policies and shows you all of your relying parties, all of your user journeys, all the different technical profiles. So you can sort of jump back and forth between them, make it a little bit easier. And then there's also a viewer for viewing App Insights. So if you have App Insights enabled, App Insights absolutely is a must if you're using custom policies. App Insights makes it much easier to see what's happening. I mean, there's a whole lot of data that shows up, but it does make it a lot easier. So,
the fact that you have a custom policy on the standby, JP, just has me so worried, man.
Well, it's one of those things. So the extensions are still loading, so they're not up yet. But when the extension does load, down here you'll have a new blade that shows you your custom policies, all the different components of them, and then your App Insights stuff. So you can see your last run, for example, of this was my last authentication experience or my last user journey in V2C, and then how it works. So. And yeah, that's true. It's all App Insights now. I hadn't heard that you couldn't use the old recorder to arbitrarily go. So I'll look and see. But App Insights does make it much easier. So, but yeah, and check out the extensions. Maybe eventually it'll load. I'm sure my laptop's about to melt through this concrete floor. So, okay.
There's a comment here from Anthony again. The one thing that is kind of a bummer is that you can't use the old user journey recorder, HTTP magic endpoint, and you must use App Insights. Do you have any advice on that?
Yeah, I don't. I didn't think that had been removed, that you could send it to an arbitrary endpoint. So I'll have to go back and look. It's been a few months since I've built any custom policies too, so I may be a little bit behind, but the delay in App Insights can be frustrating. As long as development mode's turned on, it makes it a little bit faster, but we're still talking about like dozens of seconds, right? Or you're still talking about minutes, not necessarily immediate feedback when you're debugging. So it's like even slower remote debugging. So,
indeed.
But we'll take a note and see if maybe we can get an answer by Thursday when we have our community hours.
Yeah, I've already taken a note for that. We'll reach out to the right people.
Okay, good. And maybe we can invite some of the B2C folks on here sometime in the next couple of weeks.
Yeah.
Krister just did that great session, that great session for everybody internally. So, okay, so back to our Blazor app. And the one other question about this being Microsoft specific. Yes, Identity.Web is a Microsoft specific, Microsoft Azure AD and Identity Platform specific library, because the purpose of it is to make working with Azure AD easier. There are other facilities in ASP.NET Core, for example, for interacting with a generic OpenID provider, a generic OAuth provider, like Auth0 or somebody else. In fact, this add Azure AD, this extension method up here, and the Identity.Web, they both use the OpenID Connect provider under the hood. And so the OpenID Connect provider that's your generic one for any standards compliant one. So as of right now, Identity.Web is just for interacting with with Microsoft's identity platform, because it also has the specifics of MSAL for talking to our endpoints to get tokens specifically for our services. So, but if you have another provider that you wanted to add, it would be just add authentication. You'd add a new scheme here. Was it OpenID Connect defaults authentication schemes? You might have a second one here, and then you would add OpenID Connect, and then all of your OpenID Connect metadata from your provider would go here. So the real advantage to Identity.Web is it removes the requirement to do this line on 36, and then also have to go and use MSAL as a separate library for getting tokens when you need them for talking to services. So it's sort of an OpenID Connect and an OAuth 2 blend to make it a little bit easier. But yes, if you were not using our platform, you're not left in the cold, at least.
And just to clarify, it's not just for Azure AD, it's also for B2C. So it supports both.
That's true.
Under Azure AD, we put the full umbrella there. But yeah.
Yeah. Anything that falls in the Microsoft Identity platform. So Azure AD, B2C, Microsoft account, all of those work there.
Exactly.
Okay. So let's go back to our app. So we're cool. So now we're here. So let's go look at our URL, and if you see in the URL now, we are at the V2 endpoint. So here's our V2. So that means that our new code is working, which is excellent. And our client ID is still the same, so that's good. Let's see what kind of scopes we have. We should just have our regular ones. We've got a redirect URI. We've got a response type. It's still an ID token. We've got our scope of OpenID and profile, which is effectively the same as user.read. And then we've got a bunch of extra state information. Cool. So we're using the V2 endpoint. Now we're being asked to consent to view our basic profile and maintain access to the data you've given it access to. I'm not going to worry about consenting on behalf of the org, because these are our basic permissions that users can consent to by default. So of course you can override this or change it, but these are our basic ones that any user in your org can agree to or consent to by default. Of course, you can turn that off if for whatever reason you need to. So now we've set consent for this user. Oh, and my session timed out, so let's sign in again. I guess we talked for a while. So, and it's 11, so we'll probably take a quick 5 minute break here in just a minute. So, okay, so my permissions are requested. Yep, let's do that. We're going to accept them. And now we should get back into the app and hopefully get authenticated. And there we are. Cool, we're authenticated again. just like we never left, right?
Yep.
Cool. So I think next we should look at getting some data out of the graph. So what kind of data do you want to get out of the graph today?
I did say emails.
Emails? All right.
Yeah, emails. Like we could do calendar, but then the calendar will require a little bit of a more involved UI. Maybe we make it a bigger project, but for now we can enumerate through the emails and put them in a list.
That's true, because one thing that there are many things that I'm not, and one of those things in that very long list is any type of UI designer.
Oh yeah, we need a UI designer here to help us out. I feel the same. I can cut code, but when it comes to choosing colors or layouts or anything like that, I am awful.
Graph Toolkit. The Graph Toolkit's out. Although we can't use it here because it's all React, but
yeah,
that might be something to check out in the future. So, okay.
Well, yeah, the Graph Toolkit comes with all these predefined templates, and you can tweak the CSS as well to your heart's content.
Yep, it does. That's cool. So let's. Why don't we take a really quick, like just 5 minutes, just so we can, bio breaks and whatever, and then we'll get started on
Tokens.
And then we'll get back and we get started on tokens in just about 5 minutes.
Yeah, sounds good, man.
Cool.
See you all in 5.
we do need to give the stream a name because we've been kicking around a bunch of ideas, but
we never settled.
We don't really know what to call it. I mean, we could give it a typical Microsoft name. The Microsoft Identity Developer Streaming Ultimate Series 7 Home Edition, maybe.
Preview final.
_ draft _ V2. Okay.
Should be 0.2, right? Yeah, let's
right.
go.
Okay.
Let's do this.
So let's see. Let's get back into our docs and see what we need to get our calendar in here too. So we've got some extra some extra configuration stuff, and in fact, there are a couple pieces of info in here that are probably pretty relevant. New stack, who dis? I like this. I like that. So typically when you're using the older sort of helpers for Azure AD, you may need to manipulate the tokens or something on your own. You want to go get some extra claims from a database or something, and that you tend to do that on the token validated event. And so token validated means our token has come in from the identity system from Azure AD or wherever, and it's been validated by the code. So we know we have a token that's valid, and token validity is sort of a whole discussion in itself of what makes it valid. But at the base level, we want to make sure the signature is correct. So because all of our identity tokens are transparent JWTs, we have a signature block at the end. So the signature block is signed by us when we issue it, and then you can validate that signature. Of course, you should never validate the signature manually on your own. You should always let a library do it, preferably a library written by people who are doing it on a regular basis. But once the token's been validated, we can add our own claims or manipulate the identities in other ways if we want to fetch some role data out of the token or from a database, or pivot some claims or change some claims. Whatever we want to do, we should do that here in this on-token validated event. So if you have a similar requirement where you need to do that, you do it in a very similar way to what you would do in the normal non-Identity.Web mode, we call it that. So you can still hook into all of the different events that you would hook into normally, all of the typical OpenID Connect events, and you can set those here. So the ones that are in the docs are things like on-token validated, but there are also other ones like on authentication failed, or on authorization code received, if you need to do something manually with the authorization code yourself.
Right. It's nice to see that we expose them for people to do what they feel.
So we've signed some users in. Let's go look at signing a user in and fetching some data from a web API. In our case, our web API will be the graph, right?
Yeah.
So let's see. Calling protected web APIs. So there's also a whole other side to this around protecting your web API. So if you have a web API that you've built that services a mobile app or some other kind of a front end, then you can also use Identity.Web to wire up JWT bearer authentication as part of that too. So if you want to check tokens as they come in, we can help you do that too. Although there's also the sort of code overhead for doing that is a little bit smaller, because all you really need to do is validate a token when it comes in. Where it gets a little tricky is when my front end calls my web API, and then my web API makes another call on behalf of that user downstream to something like the graph. So if I have a back end API for my front end JavaScript app or something, or Blazor WebAssembly app, and that API needs to go get data from the graph, that's called an on behalf of flow, and that's something that we need to, that's something where your server API still needs to be able to go and fetch tokens with something like MSAL to go talk to that. So
We do have a nice extension method called add protected API, which calls another protected web API, which is fun to. It's a proper tongue twister, but the fact that we have it all in one line and it does it for you, it's absolutely brilliant. We should cover that at some other point, but for now, let's focus on the task at hand.
Okay. All right. So this is for protected web APIs, which we are not doing today. Maybe something we'll do a little bit later on. So let's see. When we want to call a service, I don't remember if there was an override or an extra thing in Identity.Web for doing that. So let's go over to our.
There is.
Microsoft Identity Developer Docs. Let's see if my search history is good enough in Bing to get me where I actually want to go. It looks like it might be. Cool. Okay.
Of course there is.
So let's go look at web apps and ASP.NET Core. No, we don't want that. We want a web app that calls
protected web API.
A protected web API. Let's see.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess when you think about it, there are kind of two ways we could talk to the graph.
Yep.
Do we want to talk to the graph on behalf of the user as the user, or do we want to talk to the graph as the application, right? So some of that's going to depend on your app and sort of how your app works. If you think about how we built apps, a few years ago, let's say we're on-prem and we've got a database, a MySQL or SQL Server somewhere, and we had a web app and that web app was running. If that web app talks to SQL with a service account, like a domain service account, then the web app is responsible for filtering the data so that it only shows for the user, right? So that could be something as simple as, select field from table where user ID equals, 17 or whatever the user ID is, right? Because that's something the web app itself is going to know that, right? But the flip side to that is impersonation, where the user's sort of context would flow through the web app and then also be used to connect to a downstream database like a SQL Server. At which point, things like row-level security would take over, and the user would only see what they had access to in the database itself, right? And that was more overhead because you had to know which users needed access to which tables and and which rows and that sort of thing. So I'd say, like in my experience doing enterprise dev for a long time, I very rarely saw web apps do user impersonation all the way down to a data store. It was very infrequent because usually the app would do it, right? But now it's a little bit different because now things like APIs like the graph, we want to use the user's context if we can, because that user is the only user who's consented to say, yeah, you can access my email or you can access my this or my that. So I think it's very sort of different in terms of how you have to think about it, because now a user's going to sign in, and then we want to also use that user to go and make a call to an API.
Exactly. Yep.
And so that's tends to be something like the on behalf of flow, where the web app itself or the API itself is going to make a call down to that downstream API as a user. So let's see here. I want my web app to go and call an API. I don't need to secure an API. I just need to make a protected call.
Yep.
So that's a quick start. We don't want a quick start.
You remember I have a blog post that explains how to do it on a .NET Core 3.1 app, not a Blazor app, but a .NET Core 3.1 app, and that should work for this instance as well. If you want to look at that code, I put it on the chat.
Is it Christos Matskas or C Matskas?
C Matskas.
Okay, sorry.
That's fine.
I couldn't remember which one it was. All right, so Now, that's more of a protected API, right? So this is...
No, that's not the one that you're looking. It's further back.
You're working with OneDrive data? Is that yours?
No, yeah, that's mine, but that's further back. Go back in time. It's called MS Graph APIs from ASP.NET Core 3.1.
Ah, there it is. That was back from April. Excellent. All right.
Just when Microsoft.Identity.Web came out. I think I was user 1 of that library, the NuGet package. Nobody knew it was out there apart from me because I randomly went and tested it.
So you were the first download. You were the first download of it, huh?
Probably the first download officially, because there must have been some internal ones. So I was not patient zero, if you want to call it like that, but it was there. So if you scroll down...
Yep, I found it. So we're looking at add web app calls protected web API. So we're going to change this to add web app calls protected API. And let's see. In here we need our configuration, which we have. And then we need our initial scopes. And so our initial scopes are just going to be, it's just an array, right? And to start, we're just going to get user.read because that's the one that we need, right? Am I still running? Why is this? Oh, it's been deprecated.
Oh,
so
yeah,
see
we're moving fast.
Use,
what is it?
Oh, it's use, let's see. Add Microsoft Web. Oops. Use add Microsoft Web App calls Web API. Oh, I see. Oh, very interesting. So it's a little bit different now. So instead of it being a single call, now we're going to chain them together.
So I need to go and update that blog post, by the way, since it's been moved.
Yeah,
we're moving fast in that library, right? We want to make it as consistent and as straightforward as possible.
So we're back to add Microsoft Web App Authentication, and then we are add Microsoft Web App. Add Microsoft Web App calls Web API. And then in here we give it the same configuration, and I believe in here we'll give it our scopes. So we got our config, and then we need our initial scopes. So our initial scopes for starting are going to be user.read. Okay. Okay. So now we've got, now we've got our authentication set up into the app, and we've also said, hey, we're gonna need an access token here with the scope of user.read. Now this is shorthand for https graph.microsoft.com/user.read. So your graph is the only one that lets you sort of do this shorthand of user.read or of any of the graph ones. If you, for example, have an API that you've written and it's something like API whack, it could be the app GUID, or the app registrations ID, or it could be a namespace that you give it, like, some application here, and then there's a scope on it called do stuff, or whatever you want to call it. You'd have to fully qualify it, right? But for us, for right now, we're just going to use user.read. Okay. So what this is actually going to do, so this is handling configuring the OpenID Connect provider, right? And that's what this first line is doing here on 34. So add Microsoft Web App Authentication is doing all the OpenID Connect configuration. The second line here of add Microsoft Web App calls a Web API, this is actually going to do a whole lot of work for us. So this is handling exchanging, so it's going to change it to be change the call type to include an access token in the call, right? So we're going to be pulling, changing to the response type to be ID token plus code, because we're going to request an authorization code. We're going to swap that authorization code for an access token, and then we're going to go cache that authorization code. And if you had done this in the past, it would require you to hook into the authorization code event, create a new MSAL object and call call acquire token by authorization code async in MSAL, and then handle caching it. So your startup would have this huge, anonymous function plunked in there that has all of the MSAL goop for connecting back to swap out the authorization code, and then also caching it. So the other thing we need here is to add the in-memory token caches. So the other providers that are available, there's a session token cache. So if you've already got distributed session, you could use that.
There's a distributed token cache.
Yep, and then the distributed one. So if you've already configured a distributed cache with something like Redis in ASP.NET Core, then you can use that as here. You can use that here as well. For right now, we're going to use an in-memory one because we're only running on my box, and so we don't really have to worry about. Although you never know, stranger things have happened. Be sitting here like, why did we run? We got 48 instances of Kestrel running, and we can't get back to our tokens. So. Okay, cool. So we've got, we're going to add authentication. We're going to add that we're calling a web API. And then we're going to cache that in an in-memory token cache. So,
do we have the right scopes in there for the web API call? Did we add the emails yet?
Nope, not yet. Just user.read. That's the only one we have as of right now.
I got ahead of myself. So excited. Right.
And well, let's go to one of our pages. Let's just add something to one of our pages that requires a graph call. So let's see here. How about index? Now, I've done a couple apps in Blazor. Nothing crazy. We did one for like a hackathon thing that was a lot of fun. So if the promise of Blazor stays true, I, as a mediocre ASP.NET developer, should be able to crank out a new page that's got some data in it relatively quickly, right?
Yep.
So I guess we could create a component and do all that stuff, but that sounds like a lot of work. So instead, I'm going to go look at the fetch data one, because we don't need a weather forecast, because I know what it is right now. Because I'm in Michigan right now, it's like 70 degrees and breezy. It's beautiful. Yeah. And Thursday, I'm going to go home to South Carolina, where it is neither of those things, where it's 95 and humid and miserably hot. So let's take over our fetch data page. Instead of doing weather forecast, let's do let's go get just something really basic from the graph, right? So I'll just create a I'm just going to put a string in here for the moment. And we'll call it some, what should we get? Maybe the user, what should we get off of my user object?
Email, I would say.
Oh, that was boring. We already got that one.
I got that one. How about, I can't remember what it is. Like, there's so many fields out there. I don't know, your job or whatever. Although that won't be populated, right? Let's see. Name, do you have a telephone assigned to your account? Because some of these, if it's sample data, then it tends to be fairly empty.
Let's go
look.
My tenant is definitely not sample data.
You have real data. Nice.
It's my dev tenant I've had for a very long time. So this is a Graph Explorer. This is if you've never used a Graph Explorer, it's a really neat tool for exploring the graph and finding out all sorts of neat information and trying out queries and testing them beforehand. It's at aka.ms/ge. So it is a pretty short link, pretty easy to remember. And you can use sample data or you can sign in. So I'm going to go ahead and sign in because why not, right? We're here. We might as well. What's the worst thing?
ak.ms/ge. I wonder how many, how much effort it took to get the two-letter ak.ms link. So, they're not available domains out there all the time. So a two-letter domain is pretty cool.
Okay. So, we put that link in the chat too. It's just aka.ms/ge. aka.ms/ge. This is for the Graph Explorer. And you can use Graph Explorer with your personal Microsoft account. You can use it with your with your corporate account. You can use it with any type of Microsoft account, be it a personal one or a corporate one. So if we do let's do a me on the run. Oh, and there's I do have a phone number on there, which is actually a real phone number. Imagine that. Let's do. Won't be my phone number much longer. Let's do the beta endpoint, because the beta endpoint right now has a whole lot of extra data, and so we can see some more interesting stuff about them, right? So let's see what fields have some data. Wow, look how old. I mean, this is how old this tenant is. I haven't had a domain at my house in probably 5 or 6 years. Let's look and see what we've got. How about...
You can do city, I suppose, and
yeah, city and state. Let's do city and state.
City and state.
And let's do display name, city, and state, right? Display name is probably a common one that a lot of people need to pull. So let's pull back the user display name. Okay. Now let's think. What is the best way for us to do this? So we probably don't want to have a web call in our initialized, but whatever. Well, this is on initialized, so we were already initialized. So let's do it here.
Are you doing HTTP client and then you're crafting the URL, or are you going to use the MS Graph SDK?
Oh, I'll just do an HTTP call.
Oh man, you and SDKs.
So we probably need to inject an HTTP client instead of doing our own. But for the moment, let's just do a new one. New HTTP client. Oops.
It is bad practice, by the way. Do not inject. Do not new app HTTP clients randomly in your app, because you could come across issues. So ideally, if you are designing a proper app, that should be injected and make it more robust.
We'll go back and do it.
Okay. Just people should know. So
and the reason for that is that when you dispose of an HTTP client, it doesn't actually dispose. So the underlying resources are still there. So the sockets are still open, like at a time wait status in Windows, if you go look at them. So you by continually recreating them, even if you're wrapping them in a using block and disposing them, they're not actually being disposed. Like the managed object is being disposed, but the underlying pieces are not. So you want to make sure you're injecting your HTTP clients into your controllers or into your views or into anything that's going to use it, and use as few of them as possible. In fact, I think there's a newer way to do it in .NET 3.1. It's an HTTP client factory, and so you just call the factory. And you can create named ones too. So if you're making lots of different calls, like if you've got a big app that's making lots of different service calls, you could create multiple instances with different host names. So if you've got a root host of Graph, you might have a Graph HTTP client. If you've got a root host for some API of your own, you might have a root. You might have a root one for that. So
yeah, I'm adding the link to the chat. So best practices around HTTP clients here. We have a document that explains why and how in 3.1.
So first we need to. Very cool. Thank you. So first we're going to get a token, and then we're going to go make a call. Make API call. Okay. Inject our thing, and so. In here, now, is there anything, does Identity.Web give us any sort of facilities for interacting with MSAL in a different way, or do we just new up a new confidential client app and use MSAL the way we would normally?
No, we have the iToken acquisition service that you can inject into your controllers, and that allows you to grab the appropriate tokens. Again, if we go back into my blog post, you should see, although that might have changed since I did it, but there's no harm in trying that and see if that works. So, but I also had a Graph client for my usage. So I was injecting the token acquisition into my Graph client using the SDK. It makes things a little bit easier, but again, it all comes down to how you want to use it. So there's a graph service client factory that grabs the token for you. So the iToken acquisition allows you to call a method called getAccessToken for user async, passing the scopes, and that should return back the appropriate results.
Okay, cool. Yeah, that is much easier than creating a new MSAL instance and everything else. So, okay, so we've got our token acquisition service, and we're going to do a get access token for user. And it's important to note that this is for the user. This is not for the application.
Yep.
If it was an application, that might be a daemon app, a service app, some sort of long-running background process, or like a batch data mover or something like that, where you do not have a user context available. Those are pretty high privileged, so you don't normally use those, right? So those you don't normally use those in web apps unless you have a specific requirement that you would need to, because we're doing user.read because we have a user, so we're going to read a specific user who's consented to that. If we were doing this with just an application permission, that permission would look like user.read.all, because the application would have rights to read all users because we don't know who the user is. We don't have a user context to change specifically which user is going to read it or which user we're going to read. So it's super important to sort of understand the difference between those, because it's totally fine to say to an app, cool, yeah, you can use any user, you can read any user object that wants to sign in. It's very different security-wise to say, and this app can totally read every other user in our directory, right? Like that would be that'd be a really big deal. So this is get access token for user. We're saying we need a token that identifies the user for the downstream service, as opposed to a token for the application. So we're going to wait on this here. And now we've got our client, and let's add a new, let's get into our default request headers. And then our authorization header is going to be a new authentication header value. The scheme is bearer, and the value is token dot. What do we get from? What does our token object look like? Is it literally just a string? Oh, it is. Cool.
Yeah, it is.
How easy is that? Okay.
Easy peasy.
So we're going to make this request, and if our data request is successful, then we're going to set our user display name. Oh, I guess we got to do a little work first, don't we? So our graph data, or let's call that user data. I'm not used to writing long variable names.
I mean, you could create a JSON object from the JSON, so you can create a deserialized object from the request, and then use that information to display rather than calling explicitly the JSON properties.
Yeah,
it's usually my preferred way.
That sounds like a lot of work.
You grab the JSON, then you come into Visual Studio, you say edit special, and then it creates the class for you. You don't have to ever go back and edit anything. It's out of the box.
No, you're right. I'm glad you're here.
That's something that not many people may have used in the past. I love that functionality. You can do XML, you can do JSON. So you can create objects to serialize to from existing XML and JSON payloads. So reverse engineering the JSON is always easier in Visual Studio. I love that functionality.
Yeah, that is pretty cool. So what did we say we were going to get? Display name?
We said display name, and then we said country or residence. What was the field?
City, I think. Right?
City and state. Was that city and state? Can't remember. I'm getting old. We need to write these things down. Remember how I said we should have a OneNote that captures that information?
Okay. So, doesn't like something. Try get string. No. Try get property. And that needs a property name. Yeah. Oops. It's going out to a JSON value. So maybe I'm not using this correctly. I've been trying to use the new one, the new
system.text.json.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Let's just try get string because we know that will exist for now, and we are going to get. Oh no, that just gets a string of the element. We want to get a property, and the property in our case is display name. What other overrides do we have? Oh, it's read-only span. We don't want that. Okay. String property read-only spans. Okay, so we don't need that. Let's see. Display name equals user data.root element.get property. Doesn't like something. Oh no, that's okay. And then I guess we can just set this to our user display name, huh?
Ditto.
Because this is getting, this is going to get an element, so then we need to get the value out of here, right?
Mm-hmm.
We'll do a get string on the property, and now we should have our string property of our display name. Cool. Okay, so there's literally 0 error handling in here. But at least we'll know if it blows up. Okay,
Yeah,
so we're
if it
making
blows up, we'll know straight away.
Okay. Oh, and we need to put our value up here too, somewhere too, don't we? So let's put it above our head. We'll just put an H1, and then have a hello user display name. There we go.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. Okay. Add some bangs and some exclamation marks to make it exciting. All right. Are you ready? Are we gonna? You ready to see
I
where it's
am
gonna go?
holding my fingers like this.
Okay.
Not
so
that I'm not trusting you.
I mean, I don't trust myself. So, okay. So we're injecting the token acquisition service, which,
Yep.
by virtue of the fact that we are using Identity.Web and that we have configured it for that we're going to be calling some downstream APIs, that should be available, right?
Correct.
And
Yep.
we've added our caches in startup. We're using our user display name field. We're getting the data for our user display name field from the graph using the token that we get from here. And then if it's a great, or if it works, then or if the call is successful, then we're going to read that. We're going to read that data, and then stuff it into our variable, and we should see it on our page. Let's go. Let's see what we get. Let me make sure I've got the right. Make sure I got a browser window open in the right context. Of course, I do not. Oh no, I do. Close this one. We don't need this one right now. Okay. Looks like we are building.
Show me the money.
I'm not quite sure what Visual Studio is doing. It's doing something though, so we'll. I guess we'll just let it do its thing for a minute. Oh, there's activity. It's moving.
I think your machine is struggling. It's not Visual Studio.
You think so?
Yeah, I think so.
I mean,
Streaming and coding at the same time. It's
yeah. I wonder if I opened the laptop because it's plugged into a dock. I wonder if I opened it if the heat would disperse better. It might work faster. I need to get like a box of dry ice and just put it on top of it. Years ago, a friend of mine calls me. She says, "Can you help me? My dad's laptop's all screwed up. Can you?
Okay.
I really need some help." I was like, "Okay." So I fired it up, and it just would not. It just would not start. Like, I mean, it would just die within a few seconds after starting, and it seemed like it would get hot and then it would stop working. And it was almost like I seem to remember it was a Pentium 4 desktop processor in a laptop, so it would get really hot.
Oh wow!
And
Talking about bad design or bad choices.
And well, I think, and so there was some custom configuration and some custom drivers that had to be installed for power management of the CPU. Okay, our app's up. So anyway, I couldn't get the thing to work long enough to get into Windows and figure out what's going on. And so I took You know those cooler things you put like in your lunchbox?
Yeah.
I took like 5 of them and put them in a drawer and opened the drawer and then hung the laptop over the top of the drawer. And it worked. It worked long enough for me to get the thing working again and get everything installed. It was completely ridiculous. So. Okay, let's log out because we don't need our app. Oh, there's nothing at this address. That's a new one. Oh, interesting. Our logout link is still going to Azure AD /account/signout. And I'm not sure we have that anymore. What is our logout link when it comes to Identity.Web?
So there's a new library called Identity.Web.UI, and we need to change the areas and the accounts that we use for login and logout. So the URLs.
All right.
I think it's under customization. So let me find that because they're slightly different. So first of all, we need to add the dependency there. Let's do that.
Oh, hang on. So, so I just cleared the state just so we don't have to worry about it for the moment. We'll come back to it in a minute. Let's see if our server call is working first. Okay, so permissions requested, maintain access to data you've given it access to, sign you in and read your profile. Cool. We're going to do that. We're going to accept it. Now we're going to go back. Make sure we get logged in correctly. Oh, uh-oh. We got some errors. Okay. We didn't create a client secret. Of course, we need a client secret specifically for
the API call.
For exchanging the authorization code for a token.
Yeah.
So let's go do that.
You have to go back to my blog post if you want to find the login, logout, or sign in, sign out URLs that Microsoft Identity is expecting.
Okay. So back in our app registration, we need to create a secret for our app. And the reason for that is that the application, when it's exchanging that authorization code, it needs to both authenticate the app and the user. So we've authenticated the app, but we've not authenticated, we've authenticated the user, but we haven't authenticated the app yet. What's interesting about this is that it actually says there's a secret, almost as if Visual Studio created the secret when it was.
But it was never configured into the app, so we can't really use it because they're one-off. You can't see them.
But if we go look at the app settings, there's no secret in our settings. So I wonder where that secret went. It seems like it got created, but it never got applied anywhere. So in fact, let's just trash it.
Funny story about client secrets, right? I was writing a sample a couple of weeks ago, and I did create a client secret, but I was too tired, and in my app settings, I put user secrets. So the Identity.Web is expecting certain name conventions for these things, and because I put user secret rather than client secret, it couldn't deserialize the appropriate ADL or Azure AD object, and it wouldn't work for the love of me. I spent like 2 hours trying to work out whether my app registration was wrong, whether my code was wrong, and it was a misconfiguration. Next morning, I called JP, we got on a call, and he spends literally 2 seconds to point out that I screwed up that. So there you go. That's an lovely embarrassing story that will forever stay with me. Now, every time I do a client secret, I make sure that it is a client secret, not a user secret.
Well, I mean, it's an extra set of eyeballs, right? I mean, I've spent hours debugging things only to realize I had a misconfigured setting or had completely forgotten about something, or you make assumptions. You're like, oh well, of course my setting hasn't changed. Then you go into your Azure App Service config or whatever, and it's like, oh yeah, I did change that. So, it's kind of funny. We have so much rigor around deployment, right? Like there's so much like focus and on being very particular about deployment and configuration management through environments, but locally. It's just anything goes, and I've certainly spent many an afternoon or an evening kind of down a rabbit hole trying to figure out what was going on. At one point, I was doing some B2C work, and I was uploading all of my policies to the wrong tenant. So I'm going back to this app like every time, like, okay, why are none of my changes going in? And then I finally realized I was uploading the policy files to the wrong tenant. So, I guess it is what it is. Okay, so we're getting loaded up here. Waiting for localhost. Still loading assemblies. Output window still cranking.
Patience.
All right, we're getting logged in. So we're over at login.microsoft.Online.com. We're logging in. All right, so now we're logged in. Cool. So
But I think you're still getting a V1 token, right?
No, we're using Identity.Web.
Oh yeah, we're using Identity.Web. It's the sign out that is the issue. Yep, sorry.
So if we look at the log files here, we'll zoom this in a little bit. If we look at the log files that are, or the log that's showing up in the Kestrel window, you see a little bit of what's actually happening, right? So the part of what the libraries are doing is going through an OpenID, some OpenID discovery too, to figure out keys, right? So we're going and getting the instance using our authorization endpoint, which happens to be the thing we just used to sign into. And then here's our post. So this is after we've received the authorization code. Now our code is posting that token or that authorization code back to Azure AD to get a token back, right?
Sweet. Yes.
So this is what's handling getting us our access token.
Mm-hmm.
So what that means is if everything worked the way that we expected it to, we're signed in, and we should have an access token for the graph in our cache. So let's go to fetch data and let's see what happens. And look, there's my name. How about that? Amazing.
Love it.
It worked.
With a few lines of code, right? So technically what? It took us less than 5 lines of code to add authentication and then grab the token, do the call to MS Graph, and get the name.
Yeah. So let's clean this up a little bit. Let's inject our HTTP service because we should do that, right? So we want to inject an HTTP client, and I think, I don't know if we actually inject the client directly or if we inject the factory, but let's go, I think we inject a factory. So let's see, services.add HTTP client, okay?
Mm-hmm.
And then I'm fairly certain what that's going to give us is a client factory. And that client factory is what we'll inject here. So HTTP client factory, and we'll call this HTTP client factory. And then down here, let's just create a new private variable called HTTP client. We'll call this our HTTP client. And here, we will use our HTTP client factory to create a client. And what's neat about it is if we had created a named one or created a specifically configured one in startup, we could access it by name here, which is kind of nice. So
yep.
HTTP client is that, and then we'll just change it through here. So instead of creating a new one, we will use this one here. Okay. And let's see, what other neat pieces of data could we go pluck off of this user object? You wanna go get a calendar or get mail or something?
I did say I want to get some mail.
You're really interested in my email, which is a little troubling.
I'm really interested in your junk email because
but his
Cortana
email
has to say about your schedule is super interesting.
But his email.
And
okay.
Your calendar will be empty, right? I mean, I don't mind doing calendar, but I don't know if you have any data. Whatever data you have.
Hey, you know what? Let's check the graph. I don't know what's on my calendar, I'll be honest.
Let's
It's probably
check the graph.
Probably stuff from my wife, kids got to go do something.
As long as you're happy sharing that information, I see no issue. Maybe we should be using a proper test tenant rather than, and you can get a free test tenant, right? Just the M365 developer program, go and sign up, populate some data. But in the meantime, we're using real life data from JP's life.
Oh, I mean, why not, right? I don't have anything in this tenant that's. I mean, none of that. I mean, I can't even tell. Oh, it's my buddy's birthday, so I mean, okay, whatever. Those are the only
calendar
things.
reminders. We can get these.
Calendar's not a good one. Let's go look at mail.
Yeah. See?
Or what is it? Messages? I think it's messages.
It says my mail. On the right hand side, there's a get my mail. So there's already a nice shortcut.
Here we go. I can see my Azure AD Identity Protection Weekly Digest report.
There you go. How do we do?
It looks like, and this one must have literally just come in a little bit ago because I didn't even see it when. Oh, you know what? It's probably in the other inbox. Oh, and there's the whole mail. Now, hey, so this is another good opportunity with some of the new stuff that was announced to build. I don't need all this, right?
Nope.
So
We need some filtering.
So let's do a select, and let's just pick out the
Subject, time received maybe, and the body preview.
subject, received, date, time, and sender.
Sender, good.
Is it called sender? What's the field called?
Send by maybe.
Collapse the body since we don't really need that. Although that click doesn't seem to be working. Oh, no, there it is. Sender. Sender dot email address. Sender dot email address. Okay.
So we're using the new capabilities that were announced at Build, right? So filtering and selecting on the data. You don't have to pull the whole object and then start filtering on the fields that you only are interested. Save bandwidth, be more efficient.
Oh, I guess did I not? I must not have had the right thing in there. Maybe it was just sender. There we go. Okay, so we've got the. So here we've got the ID, the receive date time, the subject, and the sender. So just everything I need to show my inbox, right? Is here's my list of emails, right? So let's just take this. I'm just going to take this query. This is kind of why I prefer to use. I prefer to do this, but in fact, let's make two calls. We're gonna have two. We're gonna go get our mail too. So mail request, and we're going to await our HTTP client get async, and we're gonna go to the messages. Okay. So first, we're gonna set up our display name just like we were, and if our mail request was successful. Type the wrong thing in. Mail request is, I don't know why it keeps doing that, is success status code. We're going to go, we'll go read that one. I'll just copy it for the moment because it doesn't really matter. Although, yeah, you're probably right. I should probably create a quick class or something, right?
Oh, now you're coming back to that. See?
I know, you're right. I should have just used the graph client up front, but we could just get like really tuply. Just have a stack of tuples on tuples. Subject, sender, and receive time. Okay. So let's see, mail data. We're going to use the mail request, and let's create a new private field here, and this will just this will just be mail message, an array of mail messages, and we'll just call it messages. Okay. So we've got our mail request, and I think what we'll do is mail data, root element, and then is it get array? Yeah. Enumerate array? Although it might be an object up front. It is, so the value is the array. So first we need to get the element, or get first we've got to get our value property. We'll get the property called value. And then value is an array.
Mm-hmm.
So how do we get an array with system.text.json? Enumerate array, there we go. Gets an enumerator to enumerate the values in the JSON array represented by this JSON element. Okay, cool. So this should be our mail messages array. We'll just set that for here for now. And then create a new mail message. Oops. And let's see, we've got a subject. Oops. And our subject is the, let's go back and look at our data again. Our subject is just a string in the string. So let's see, we get a property called subject. I guess when you get the value off of that, get string. And then we also have a sender. And the sender, we're going to get the property called sender. But there's an object there, right? Enumerate object. And we're going to get another oh wait. And then we'll get another property off of that. And that property is the email address. Email address, and then we'll get one more property off of that called, what should we show, the address or the name? How about
the name? Oh no, you know what? Actually, the address is more useful because it can help you identify spoofed emails and spam. So I would say let's use the email.
It's a good idea. And then the last thing we need is the received time. Get date. Do we have a get time? Oh, we do. Get date time. Okay, cool. All right. Oh, so I've done like something here. Oh, I need to get a string off of this course.
Yep.
Get string. There we go.
Do we need to format the date time?
Well, get date time does return a date time, although I wonder if we should get a time span, since that's going to have time zone data. Let's leave it for the moment. Let's see.
Okay.
Okay, and then we'll just set our messages array to this, or our messages object to this. That's going to return. Let's make this an IEnumerable message. Okay. All right, cool. We could have for each through it too, I guess, but I used to work with a guy long ago, smartest guy I ever worked with. No offense, Christos, but this guy was, he was Scottish. He's absolutely brilliant. I have no idea how we ended up working together because he was super, super smart and I was, I was me, right? And so he and I would try to see who could make the most ridiculous, the most ridiculous
lambda expressions that are unreadable, right?
That's right. It's the only way to fly. So I feel like there's a way for me to, and a dot notation must not work in the graph query, but I feel like there's a way for me to say, do we have, like, when we're querying the graph, let's see, Microsoft Graph, query, select. Like, I know there's a way to, or at least I hope that there's a way to do it. I really just want to get, like, just a single property off of a nested object, right?
Yep.
So let's see. Like, do I have to do an expand? See, I'm not sure. I'm not sure the best way to do this. So, if I do a select, let's look at the. I guess I'll look at the docs for select. So if I do a select.
Mm-hmm. I lost your sound.
No, I'm still here. I'm just not talking.
Oh.
Yeah, the select docs are pretty lean. Pretty lean.
That's a new way of. I love the right use of words there, to make it sound positive. We can definitely work on our docs to make them more efficient.
Let's see. Maybe there's something else in here. Graph API reference docs. Maybe there'd be something in here about it. Don't really see anything in here about it. Let's see if I can find a select in here. Search for select and all. I've never used doc search before.
Can we just plug in what we already have done on the URL up there on the Graph Explorer?
Yeah, it doesn't work. So if I try it, if you look at the sender property on the user object, the sender property, on the mail object, the sender property is an object. And as a property, that object has a property called email address, and that email address is another object. And then the email address object has a field or a property, two properties, one called name, one called address. And I don't, we don't care about the name. I'd really like to just get the address off of that nested object, but it does not look like I can, or that I just don't know how to do it.
But now, if you were using the Microsoft Graph library, it would save your bacon because you don't have to think about these things.
Well, that's true.
Because it serializes all the objects to what you need them to be, and then you just do dot notation on the object, and you get what you need.
Yeah.
But there are multiple ways of skinning a cat, so you want to go the hard way.
Well, but
we're with you.
Well, but here's the thing: is if I did it in the graph, if I do it in the Graph SDK, there's got to be an API call behind it. So is the SDK going to do the filtering and only give me back the data that I want? Or
that's a good question. I don't know if you can do filtering with a Graph SDK.
Or is there an API or a select format that we can use to access properties? Let's see.
I'm hitting my friend Darrell Miller he's a PM for the Graph team. I'm gonna find out if he's got any ideas about filtering on the SDK.
And it isn't really even necessarily a filter, right? It's I want to access it's kind of I want to do a select on a nested object, right? Let's see, let's see, that's Delta query. Is it expand? No. Maybe I do an expand on the email addresses and then do a select there. Let me try that. So I do an expand on sender with a select on email address. Found an unbalanced bracket expression. Oh, that doesn't sound good. So select subject, receive date, time. Okay, subject, receive date, time, and then I want to expand sender and select the email address.
Oh, dude, if you were using the SDK, it would have been so much easier.
Well, I want to limit what I return. I don't want the SDK to filter it for me.
You can do a select on the SDK. Let me put the link for other people to figure out how it works. Because I'm pretty sure we're not the first ones that are coming across this one, but I'm putting the link on the chat now. So if you want to select and do a sub query, subquery on graph objects.
Well, I might just have to do it on my own. Maybe, and I don't know what the Graph SDK is doing. If the Graph SDK, if there's a specific query, a specific format that I need to do, then I'll do it. But
there is a specific. I've sent you the link in the chat.
Yeah, but I don't know if this is filtering the data itself, or if I can create an API call that mimics that. That's what I really want.
I suspect that under the hood it does it for us, but
well, I think, and that's
what the mechanics are.
If I look at that doc that you sent me, that is that's doing a select on display name and job titles. That's generating the thing that I would expect, which is cool. But use expand to access related entities. Yeah, this isn't really a related entity. It's like a child entity. And that's what I'm not. And maybe that's just it is what it is, right? Like maybe it's just maybe that's just how it works. And I can't do that from here, which is fine. I mean, I'll just have to do it myself. It's fine. Okay, so we've got sender, email address, and then address is the property that we're after. And we got our receive time, and we're setting that to our IEnumerable mail message up top. So let's get rid of our forecast. We really need forecasts? I don't think.
No, we don't need forecasts.
Because I don't know where this forecast is coming from, but
I think it's hard coded.
Oh, it's just random.
Yeah, it's random.
Okay, well, let's not use weather forecast. Let's ditch weather forecast in favor of messages. So this is the messages, and then okay for each mail, and then we'll just use a table because why not? So we want let's see, what goes first? Our subject, and then we'll do our sender, and then we will do our received date time. Okay, we don't need our summary. We'll just change these quickly. Subject, sender, and received time. Okay, all right. Let's see what we get this time. Now, one of the things that's new about this is that we are going to need the user.read and the mail.read permissions. Now,
correct.
If we go back and look at our app registration, we do not have mail.read, right? So typically what you'd have to do is handle an exception from MSAL that says the user needs to consent to this again. Or you could add it here. So if we added this permission and then consented to it, then our user wouldn't be prompted to consent. But this might be one of those cases where there's other stuff I can do in the app, so I don't necessarily need to read the user's mail until the user explicitly says, "Hey, I'm here to read some mail." Right?
Yep.
So let's go ahead and run it, and let's see what we get. I don't know if Identity.Web and that token acquisition component, is it going to handle that for us, or are we going to have to do it on our own? I guess we'll find out.
It will handle it for us, I think.
Oh, cool.
I need to take a 2-minute break. Should we do a break and a cliffhanger at this point, and then come back and do the call?
Yeah, let's take a 5-minute break, and we'll be back at what? Let's say 12:17-ish.
Yep.
12:17-ish Eastern, and yeah, because it's going to probably take 2 minutes just for this thing to rebuild. So let's come back in a couple minutes. See you then.
And when we come back, we're reading emails from our app. Awesome.
All right. Okay, we're back. So we actually don't have much left. We're gonna get our consents and our permissions all sorted out, and then we will and then I think we'll be almost done. All right.
Can you believe it? Within our time frame. Not like last week when it took us 6 hours to do the 2-hour stream that we thought it would take us, right?
That's true. At least we were building something net new today. Okay, so like we were just saying too, like there may be other functionality in your app that doesn't involve reading my mailbox, like this counter, this fidget counter that I have. And so we don't necessarily need to ask for that permission just yet. So when we hit fetch data, hopefully we are asked to consent to read our mail. So let's see what happens this time around.
The anticipation is killing me.
I know. I'm really curious now. Oh, okay. So we've broken. Okay, so we don't have any mail and messages, likely because mail was empty. So let's see what's going on here. We'll just let this run and blow up. Yep. Blow up. Okay. So let's go back home. Oh, it looks like we might be totally broken here. Okay. So now we're back here. Let's fetch, and our messages object is still empty. It looks like we're not even hitting our other one. Interestingly enough. So I wonder if it's because we need to log out and log back in. So we need to get that fixed too, our log out and log in stuff.
Yes.
So we can sort of properly log out, right?
Yep. Back to my blog post.
Yep. But let's see here. Okay, I'll let this reload quickly, and if nothing else, maybe I'll do it in a private window just to see if our code itself is working. And,
that's a good point.
And then we can go sort out our logout issue.
Exactly.
Okay. I don't even know where this window's going to. The tool is currently busy and not responding to messages. I have no idea what tool that is, to be honest. All right. So let's do a private window where we have no sort of context. Let's go to the localhost 5001. And we'll get zoomed in here. Okay, so we're going over to Microsoft.Online.com, trying to sign me in. So we'll go ahead and get signed in. Since this is a private window. Okay, get signed in. I'll have to MFA. Where's my telephone? Okay, approve. All right, yeah, we can stay signed in. That's fine. So now we're signed in. We should get back over to the app. And we haven't hit any of our new code yet because we're not yet in that page, right? And you'll notice we didn't have any sort of extra consent this time either because we haven't yet asked for that consent. So let's go to fetch data and see what we get. Okay, so we're going to try to acquire a token for the user that is user read and mail.read. So let's see what happens here. And now we're blowing up. So it doesn't look like token acquisition is actually handling our new thing. So, and I wonder if that's a function of Blazor, of doing it in Blazor server side rather than doing it in a typical MVC app. So this might be a gap that we need to talk to our folks about and see where sort of what the expectation is, because if we need to be redirected. Which we would, because we need to be redirected to go and reconsent. I don't know, because we're in Blazor, I don't know if we would have the same access to do that. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know, because we don't really have like an HTTP request at this point because we're in a socket, right? Yep. So I'm not sure if we would have access to do a redirect here, although we...
Did not Javier say that we need to upfront request all the permissions and there's no way to do incremental consent? I think that's what we discussed. So you have to do that upfront, get all the permissions upfront, and do it. So we need to go back to our startup.cs to configure that.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think I do kind of remember him mentioning that now, and I think it's specifically because of this problem. Because if we think about the problem of incremental consent, what we're really saying with incremental consent is that when we arrive at the point of needing an extra permission, what our sort of workflow is we check to find a token that has that scope. If the token with that scope doesn't exist, then we need to go get one. And there are all sorts of reasons why we might need one. We might need one because the user has expired, their access tokens have expired, or because we don't have one with the right scope. And in our case, we don't have one with the right scope because in startup, we didn't add mail.read until just now.
Correct.
And so in JavaScript apps and in .NET apps, we can do that with token acquisition, correct? But in Blazor, because we don't have access to that, we don't have access to an HTTP request or response, as of right now, we can't do that. So that's probably one big note here is be sure to request all required permissions up front.
Yes.
Now, that doesn't mean they have to be in your app registration. It just means that in your code for a Blazor server-side app, we have to make this request up front when we log the user in, as opposed to relying on doing it later on downstream.
Yep, no incremental consent, in other words.
Well, it is sort of incremental. I guess it's probably closer to dynamic in that the app is asking for what it needs up front, and the fact that we have to do it up front is a Blazor sort of limitation right now. But in Azure AD, if we go back and look at our API permissions, they're still the same. We haven't added mail.read here yet. So let's run this again. Let me close this window. So let's run this again, see if we get the right authentication, the right token, and then we'll go get our login, log out UI sorted out. And you said that was in your blog post, right?
For which one?
For
you mean for the sign in, sign out? Yes. If you go back to my blog post, that's correct.
For adding the UI components?
Yeah. You have to scroll down to the bottom, and there is it's on section 3.
All right.
Have we added a Microsoft.Identity.Web library into the project? We have not. So we'll need to do both.
Yep. Or, of course, we could always generate them ourselves, but that, we don't necessarily need to do that. So.
Well, it's nice to get the out-of-the-box experience in quotes.
Right. Yep. So,
remember, the less code you write, the less chances are you'll get a bug, right? So if the library supports it and it's there, then out of the box straight away you can use it. It means you don't have to roll out your own code, you don't have to test it. We know that as long as you provide the appropriate area and endpoint or controller that matches what the SDK, the library, is expecting, then it should work.
It is rather opaque, though.
It is.
How would you know this if you hadn't done it before, right?
I did stumble across this one before, and I had the challenge. So there you go.
So let's see, if I clear my cookies and do a hard refresh on the page, I wonder if that kills my session since it's not there. And it does. So we went over to Azure AD. Okay. And now Azure AD is asking for a new permission. So in this case, you'll always see all of the permissions an app is asking for in this consent page. So we see it like to maintain access to data we already gave it access to, wants to sign us in, and now it also wants to read our mail. Right?
Yep.
And even though we've already consented to these top two, we still have to consent to the new one. And rather than just showing you the new ones that are being asked for, we show you all of them. So you know without a doubt that these are the permissions that this app will have after you click the accept button, right?
Yes. Yep.
And I'm not going to worry about doing it on behalf of my org. I'm just going to do it for me. So let's accept. And now we'll get back into our app. And it looks like it's swapping. So we see some activity over there in Kestrel. We're signed in, and let's see what we get this time. Okay, so we're hitting a breakpoint. That's a good thing. In fact, let me take these breakpoints out of here. Okay, and we're still getting this must be a different bug. This is a John bug, I think. So
it has a name. It's a John bug.
Let's see. Oh, am I doing these out of order? Maybe that's all it is. So let's put our breakpoint back and let's go look at our token and see what we get. So I wonder if we ought to initialize our mail message enumerable with no data.
Oh, an empty collection.
I'll just do a new. We'll just do a new list of them.
That's a good point.
A new empty one.
Mm-hmm.
And then we could probably instead we'll do an add range here and a to list on this. There we go.
Sweet.
And I guess we'll just change this to an I list so we can add a range. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see. So there's my select dot to list and then close parens. Okay. We do something wrong here. What's this thing squawking about? So here's our add range to the array. Here's our open, our select open. Yeah, that all looks okay. And then that's our close. Yeah. I wonder if Visual Studio just hasn't caught up with our changes yet.
Closing up in the file again.
I suppose you're right. Let's do that. Fetch data.razor. Yep, now it's fine. Okay, cool. Okay. Oh no, it still didn't like it. Oh, am I not? Do I need to do a collections.generic here? I didn't think I had to do that, but does iList not have an add range on it? I could have sworn that it did.
No, it might be.
Whatever. Okay, well, that seems. I could have sworn that it did. I mean, that was the whole point of the list. But whatever. Okay, that's fine. Whatever. I'll use a list for now. That's fine. I mean, we could do it the other way too and just initialize it earlier. But if we're going to use, I mean, which we don't even have to use a list. I guess we could use something else. But we'll stick to a list for now. Okay. So
There you go.
now we're running or we're building. So we'll let it do its thing, and then we'll get we'll check our tokens. And we'll go take our token and take a look at it over in JWT.ms too, just for posterity.
Yeah, we haven't done that yet.
Yeah, we haven't done that today.
That's a good idea.
Yeah,
And we have to fix the sign in, sign out. Let's not forget that one.
Yeah. Oh, that's right. We do need to fix sign in, sign out, which we will do. Which, again, that may be something we need to check to see, too, to make sure that that works as expected when we're in a Blazor app, right?
Correct.
I would assume that it does because, I mean, it's effectively just it's a hard redirect or hard move to another. It's just like any other A-link, right? Or anchor link, so it should be fine, but... Okay, so it looks like we're getting close. Still loading a little bit. Let's see. Crank, crank, crank. Let's see where we get. Okay. Looks like we're all loaded up, so let's get over here to localhost 5001. Oh, my colors have changed on the console. I wonder what that's all about. Whatever. Okay, so let's go back to fetch some data. Okay, it looks like we got some errors. So something wasn't right. Oh, am I accessing our thing incorrectly? Oh, no account or login was passed to the acquire token silent call. So I wonder. I guess that's probably a function of us having closed Kestrel, so our in-memory cache is gone. And that would be why that wouldn't work. You know what? Let's go fix our UI right now. So that is, let's see. So that is not here. So down on our add controllers with views is where we add Microsoft Identity UI. We have to go get a NuGet package for that. So let's go get our package. I guess I could do this in the package manager, but whatever. So that's Microsoft.Identity.Web .UI. Okay. So Microsoft.Identity.Web.UI. Okay. Let's go find that one. Get it installed. Cool. Yep. Get that in. Accepted. This is still 0.2.0 preview. Cool. And then in our startup, we're going to add, so off of our add controllers with views, that's where we're going to add our Microsoft Identity.UI. So add Microsoft starting IntelliSense, it says. I'll give it a minute.
Starting IntelliSense.
Add Microsoft Identity UI. There it is. Cool. Okay.
Yep.
So that should give us the correct links for sign in and sign out. However,
no. Is there a partial login in Blazor?
There is. So it's login display. So currently these are going to Azure AD /account/sign out. Are the area names still the same? In
yeah, the area names should be ASP-area should be Microsoft Identity, Microsoft, and then Identity I capitalized, so Microsoft Identity, and then there are ASP controllers. There's account, and for ASP action we have sign out and sign in respectively.
Okay, so instead of Azure AD, it is Microsoft Identity.
Exactly.
Okay, and then we have account and then sign in. And
correct.
Sign out, right.
So that remains consistent. It's only the first bit.
The area, pretty much the area path, right?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So we've updated that to point to the new UI that we just pulled in. So good. Okay. Cool. So let's run it. Now we should be able to sign out. Once we sign out, we'll be able to sign back in, get our cache filled up, and go get our stuff. And again, like this is kind of what we were talking about a little bit earlier around caching. What we're going to do for caching is, every time I kill the process, our cache is gone because it's an in-memory one. And
yep.
It's definitely if you're going to production at all, in any shape or form, you're going to have some sort of a persistent cache for storing those files. And in last week's stream, we were doing our 8 out of MSAL migration. We talked a little bit about MSAL caching because MSAL caching itself is a little different in how you do it. So instead of worrying about the caching yourself, instead you spend a whole lot more time interacting with the cache that MSAL provides.
Yep.
So you handle, persistence mechanisms to your store of choice, but your
serialization, deserialization from the cache is taken care by MSAL.
That's right. You don't deal with any of that at all. So it's kind of that part's sort of a black box to you, which is great because you don't have to worry about how MSAL is going to give you bytes. All you do is take bytes and persist them somewhere. So
exactly.
All right, so let's try our logout button, and it's spinning, so that's good. And there we go. So I've logged out. It's taken me over to Azure AD to log out. So Azure AD is now asking me which account do you want to sign out of. So I'll sign out of my account. So hang on a moment, and you're signed out. It's a good idea to close your browser windows. And now we're back at our application, and our application says, hey, you've been successfully signed out. So let's get back and go get signed in again. And this way we'll have a token. That token will live in our cache. And hopefully this time we get our mail, and everybody can look at my super exciting email inbox.
I'm curious what Cortana will say about your time allocation. And making sure you take breaks.
Now that'd be a goal, is to make your inbox such that it makes Cortana blush.
Yeah, you got 0 email today, 0 inbox.
I just started using Hey, like Hey email.
Yeah.
It's pretty neat. I like it.
I got a temporary account, and I don't know how I can switch to a permanent account. I haven't received any information about that.
You have to pay.
So now I can't log in. Oh, you have to pay for it.
Mm-hmm.
Why pay when you get free email from Outlook? Dude, I am not paying.
I mean, I pay for Office 365.
I do indeed as well. But like I currently have two accounts already with Outlook and Gmail for my personal stuff. I don't want to have another one on top of everything else.
Okay, so we're running. Let's go over to JWT.ms and take a look at our token.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so JWT.ms is a tool that we publish for reading and parsing transparent JWTs, and it doesn't have to be a Microsoft created JWT. It can come from anywhere, but of course we use it for all of our stuff. So here's a JWT that I just received, and you'll notice there are a few bits of information in here, but and this is a graph access token. So this is not for me. This is not for me to parse and read in my application. This is only for me to take and give to the graph. Because tomorrow, the graph could say, you know what, we're completely changing our access tokens, so they're going to be totally opaque, and you have no idea what's in them. Because you are not the target. Your app is not the audience for an access token for talking to the graph, right? Now, obviously, if your app was its own registered API and you were checking an incoming token on your own app, that's different. But when you're receiving a token for a downstream service, never, ever, ever, ever take a dependency on it in your code, because that access token is not intended for you. So, Kyle would be very happy that we said that, because Kyle makes a very strong point that you are never, ever, ever to dig into access tokens. So, but one of the things to take a note of is, of course, you'll see this is our graph access token, and it has our scopes in it. It has mail.read and it has user.read. So, presumably, when we send this downstream to our app or to the graph, we should be able to get our mail data. So, all right. So we got our display name. Cool. Now let's go get our mail, and it looks like we're going to get our mail data too, because we got a success status code on both of them. So let's see. Is it going to pop up? Are we going to get our mail? Uh-oh. Something happened. Given key was not present in the dictionary. So apparently,
something is not in the collection.
Apparently my manual JSON processing is not as good as I thought it was going to be. Subject, receive date, time, and sender. Let's just go look at our parsing and see. And see what happened. So let's make sure we'll start with our messages array. Make sure we had data there. So fetch this data. All right, let's do a reload. And we'll go back to fetch data. Okay, cool. So our messages array, does it have any results in it? It does. So we've got some data in here. Now this is the value type of object. Oh yeah, okay, which makes sense because it is an object, right? It's our mail message.
Yep.
And then our mail message itself, let's just go pull back one of these first ones. Let's see, messages. Just go grab one quickly. Our message has something. There's something in here that it doesn't like. In fact, while I'm in here, let's just do Maybe I shouldn't do this in a select. Maybe we should do it in a for each, just so we can
enumerate and grab the
just
right
so we
properties,
can,
right?
Yeah, just so we can enumerate it and see if one of the properties is failing. So, okay, so we got our request, and now Visual Studio is doing something. So we're gonna, I guess, we'll let it do its thing while we're waiting. I don't know which key was not in the dictionary, so let's just stop briefly. You know, as much as I like Lambda expressions, that is one thing that's difficult, is debugging them correctly. So, Visual Studio is now hard hard locked. So let's see if it can recover. Okay, maybe.
It's thinking about it.
Thinking. That's a good way to describe it.
Yeah. See, I should that word again.
Okay. So,
Word masters, not developer advocates.
So our value is an array, and then you know what? I think probably our X is an object. So I think first we need to get, well, we shouldn't have to get an object out of there. So for each one of our mail messages, you know what else we need to put in here while I'm thinking about it? Let's also put a top 10. Let's only get like the top 10 mails, just so that we don't.
That's a good point.
We don't want to necessarily pull back everything.
It will be a long email list.
So sender has a property called email address, which has a property called address. I wonder if this actually is an object. No. So get property called email address, and email address is no, I mean, a process used by Visual Studio has encountered an unrecoverable error. We recommend saving your work, then closing and restarting Visual Studio.
Wow.
Who's got time for that? Okay. I mean, we're 16 minutes away from the end of the stream today, and I'd love for this to work within our streaming window instead of last week where it took a little bit longer. So I just need to figure out. Let's just do a for each on this thing for the moment.
Yep.
For each in messages array. Oops. And then I'll just grab this chunk of code here. And let's see, we'll do a messages.add here. And we'll just change this to M. Okay. And cool. Okay. At least this way we can kind of sneak a peek at what's going on in here.
Mm-hmm.
Although I probably shouldn't do it in the object initializer, so let's just do I'll just do this. And then we'll do message.subject.sender.receive-time, and then we will just add our message object to that collection. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And then why is this? Oh, I need some semicolons, right? And once we can get this sorted, we'll go back to our other expression. Although I guess I'd be kind of curious to see like which one is faster, but that's cool. All right, let's put our breakpoint in here and see where we are breaking in terms of our JSON parsing. And if if I can't get it working right now, I'll switch to the Graph SDK. If that's what you want, we'll switch to the Graph SDK.
It's not what I want. It's a choice, right? So you can do you can hand roll your code, or you can use the SDK and make your life a lot easier. It's totally up to you. We're not being picky here.
I think having the SDK for pulling your display name is probably a bit of overkill. But now that we're digging
we
into
did
messages,
say before, right? If you're only doing it once, like if you're only doing one call to the graph and that's it, then there's not really a major benefit in pulling down the whole SDK. However, if your app is fairly involved and it does quite a few things with the graph, then the SDK is definitely a good tool in your arsenal.
Yeah, that's true. Maybe sometime in the next couple of weeks we'll do one on some JavaScript APIs and Graph Toolkit. I think that'd be pretty cool.
Mm-hmm.
Graph Toolkit and talking to your own API.
Oh, yes.
Because right now we've been using Graph for everything, but I think it'd be cool if we delved into building your own API out, securing it with Azure AD, and then how you interact with that, especially as more and more people are starting to build, very services-driven applications,
Yep.
So, okay. Visual Studio is still loading. Still loading up our app. It's lunchtime on the East Coast.
Mm-hmm.
So I am motivated now.
I am pretty sure you are. I think we have a meeting as well right after this one.
Oh, well, yeah, I guess we have to finish up this.
See, there's nothing like putting some time, date pressure on you to make sure that you deliver on time.
Yep. Hey, yeah, sorry, boss. Sorry I was late for your meeting, boss. I was on the internet. All right. So, we get loaded up here. It's good. More assemblies being loaded into the process. All right. Amazingly, our process is only like 100 meg. Okay, let's go fetch some data. We're already logged in from earlier, although our token cache is probably expired, so we probably need to log out and log back in, and it is, so let's log out. And we'll get logged back in. It would be kind of nice to have like parameters that say, hey, when I'm in Visual Studio and I'm debugging, why don't you use an in-private window all the time, right? Like force an in-private, like a private browser window every time you load the app, right?
I wonder if there's a way. There's definitely a flag on Edge Chromium to allow you to launch on a shortcut. I don't know if Visual Studio can be configured with that. I'm
sure it can, right? It's got to be.
Visual Studio Code is probably something that you can configure easier.
Yeah. Well, I think for me too, like I end up like, I pave my machine or I switch between machines all the time. Like I got a desktop at home and my laptop's in my bag. And every setting that I change off of an installed or a default setting is one that I have to remember to change somewhere else. Like
but Visual Studio does propagate and sync your settings, by the way.
Well, but I don't know. I mean, that seems like it'd be more of like a code setting or something. I don't know. But yeah, I mean, it does sync, which is nice. But I don't know. I need to figure out the best way to do it. But I end up taking defaults in a lot of cases just because, if my machine blows up, we'll just pave it, put Windows back on it, and away we go, right? So
I'm with you.
Okay, so we're signed back in. We had to sign out, of course, to get our token cache filled because it was a memory cache. Let's go fetch some data and figure out why our mail is blowing up. So
yes.
All right. So our first one here. Let's go get our subject, our property. Get property subject. Let's see. Did we get that one? Looks like we did. So I think it's probably going to be this email one. No, that one worked. Cool. And then we have a sender, so we got our sender, and then our receive time. Maybe it has something to do with the date parsing. I don't know. Or maybe it's not that must be it. So it says,
close.
Did I misspell received? Would not be surprised. Oh, sorry, it's received date time, not received time. So that would be why. So that's all it was.
Mystery solved.
Just a typo. Easy enough. And if that works, we can leave it, or we can put it back into our array. It doesn't really, or back into our select. Doesn't really matter. But I guess you're right. See, string parsing on your own is subject to user error.
Caution. Public service announcement, PSA.
All right. Let's let this load up again. I don't know, maybe it's just my machine. It just seems like build is super, super slow right now. Maybe it'll be different when I'm home, but right now it just seems a little slow. That's okay. I mean, in some ways, it's it's a terrible complaint, right? Like, oh, this computer is doing all the work for me, and it's so slow, you know. Speaking of things being slow, I haven't been on an airplane in 5 months now, and I noticed though, like the satellite internet. Last time I was on a plane was February. Satellite internet on the planes has gotten way faster. It's super usable. Like you can stream like Amazon Prime and Netflix and whatever straight to your device with plain Wi-Fi.
Were you the only one on the plane that day? Or
No,
maybe
it was
one of the 5 passengers?
No, I mean, it was a full flight. I mean, every time I go to Seattle, it felt like, the plane was packed.
Right.
And coming from Charlotte, like half of the people on that flight are Microsoft employees anyway. It was kind of a bummer. I was out in Seattle like every week or every month, and now, of course, we can't really travel much.
Nope.
And as much as I'd like to come and see you in person, I'm not going to drive. So
No.
be a little bit too much of a hike, I think. So, all right, let's get multi-factor done here.
Sweet.
All right, we're signed in. We should have some. Looks like Blazor's stuffing some tokens in the cache. Let's go fetch some data and see if our mail messages worked. And there they are. How about that?
Oh, at the nick of time.
Just in the nick of time.
Yeah.
So let's see. We've got some Azure AD Identity Protection, the weekly digest. 2 of them. Office changes. Apparently my some doctor I went to like 10 years ago thinks that I need a diabetes metabolism and heart attack risk reduction program. That's nice. It's funny. It's like I've noticed recently I'll get emails from companies I haven't like interacted with or worked with or used in like a long time, like multiple years. And so I don't know if like somebody's database just came back online or what, but it's like I get all these emails now from random senders. So cool. So we're getting our display name from the graph.
Yes.
And we're getting my top 10 most recent emails from the graph, which is super cool. So we went from zero to a Blazor app, authenticating with Azure AD, and getting data from the graph, all with not a whole lot of code. I mean, our startup code, we added 3 lines here, we added 1 line here. Everything else was largely the same. And of course, there are probably some ways that we could clean this up. We could use the graph client and put the graph client, inject the graph client at runtime into our Razor page, by using similar to how they were doing the forecast service. But I think if you're doing it in one page, is it really worth all of that? Is it really worth all that if you're doing it in one view? If you only need to do it in one small isolated place, maybe it's not worth all the overhead of flipping it around. But I mean, if nothing else, we've got what? Talking to the graph.
How about we go and create a quick GitHub repo and stick it in there so people can go and have a look at that?
Yeah, let's do
that.
Now. Let's do that. Now, let's see. Oh, Lord. Oh my goodness. I'm not entirely sure. I haven't really
Make sure you clean the secret. So remove the client secret.
So I'm going to prepend this with MSID dev, and we'll call this Blazor AAD graph.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see, Microsoft Microsoft.Identity.Web with Graph and Blazor. Doesn't need to be private. Cool. It looks good. I'm going to go trash my secrets anyway. I mean, somebody's had at least an hour they could go and use my secret, so.
True, that's a good point.
So I'll go trash those quickly, and that way we won't have to worry about it. All right, get rid of our secret here. Yep, all gone. And looks like this is pushing it up. So go get this. Let's go get this URI and we'll dump it into the chat. So, well, thanks everybody for joining us today. I hope you learned a little something on Blazor and on my email and connected to the graph and Identity.Web. I mean, I think for the most part, using Identity.Web was largely just like we'd use it in a more traditional MVC app, except that we had to put our scopes up front. I think that was the biggest change.
That was the biggest change, yeah.
Is we got to add our scopes when we're making our initial authentication request. So I think overall it was a relatively straightforward. At least I felt like it was a relatively straightforward way to do it. You know, we added.
Yeah. Yep. I think it took us more time to get messages rendered into the object rather than getting Identity.Web to work.
No, that's true. I mean, we didn't really have to do a whole lot. So, yep. So I guess we're pushed up here now. We'll go get I'll go get this repo link and we'll pop it in the chat, and then we will be back on Thursday morning. Actually, I won't be back on Thursday morning because I am out on Thursday, but Christos will be around Thursday morning for our community hours. Which is at 11 a.m. Eastern, 8 a.m. Pacific, Thursday.
And it's on our schedule as well, so you can find it there if you are wondering. But we're going to have a steady schedule, so Tuesdays and Thursdays, you'll always find us here in the morning, either together or solo, doesn't really matter.
Yep, and if you have questions, you can reach out to us on Twitter. If you've got questions for office hours, reach out to us on Twitter. Christos is at Christos Matskas, and I am Azure and Chill. So, send us your questions. You can also send us an email at iddevsoc@service.microsoft.com if you're more down with email. But feel free to send us a DM, send us a tweet, share your thoughts with us, leave them in the chat. And we will see you all on Thursday morning.
Sounds good.
At 11 Eastern.
Have a good day, everyone. Thank you for joining us.
See ya.